Mental illness does not discriminate.
It affects people of every race, age, gender, and social class.
It could be a loved one, a friend, or maybe even you. But you are not alone.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness supports individuals and families touched by mental illness.
Call NAMI Illinois at 1-800-346-4572 or visit our website at il.nami.org. We understand, and we are here to help.
Welcome to Spotlight on DeKalb County, a special edition of Spotlight on DeKalb County, as we're going to be visiting with Janis F. Kearney. Janis is a Clinton biographer and a literacy advocate as well, and sadly, Janis had lost her sister suffering from schizophrenia, took her life back in 1987. Janis will be speaking tonight at the Mental Health Association in the Illinois Spring Speaker event, the event being held at the Chicago Cultural Center at 78 East Washington Street. And Janis, first of all, let me welcome you to the WLBK Airways, and of course, Citizen Mike visiting with us as well. But Janis, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. I've been reading your biography, and needless to say, a fascinating life that you've lived up till now.
Thank you very much for having me. And, you know, I tell people I've lived a life of miracles because, as my bio tells you, I come from this huge family of 19 children and grew up in the South during the pre-civil rights era and just have had a magnificent, blessed life. I really have. And I think just about like most families, I've had wonderful things happen during all those years, but also some things that weren't so wonderful, but, you know, enlightening and lessons that I've been able to use.
And what a healthy outlook on it, you know, in order to have a blessed life and yet at the same time recognizing some of the pieces have been pleasant and others unpleasant. Great. So you wrote this Clinton biography.
I did. And I actually wrote it, I began writing it in 2001 after working for him as his personal diarist for a number of years at the White House. And I knew him from many years back. And I thought what I wanted to do with that book, which came out in September of 2006, was to kind of give the public a kind of different view of who Bill Clinton was to the many, many people in Arkansas and throughout the country who knew him as African Americans knew him. And I wrote the book, and almost 100 interviews were done across the country from the perspective of African Americans.
And Janis, let me ask you now, the perspective of Americans, obviously we all know Bill Clinton, but how is it different from the view of people from Arkansas, how they view President Clinton?
Well, there is not a monolithic view of him from Arkansas. He has people who are loyal. He has detractors. But the African-American view, I thought, was different in that he was a Southerner. He came from Hope, Arkansas, and Hot Springs, Arkansas. He was a white politician who had this probably unheard of relationship with the African-American community. And what I wanted them to talk about was whether that relationship was genuine, how did it come about, how did they meet him, how did they look at his legacy and his leadership. And most African-Americans that I talked to did believe that his relationship was completely genuine. Out of all the people that I interviewed, I don't think I interviewed anybody who said they didn't think it was. But I also learned that, you know, and I wanted other people to know that there was no monolithic view when it came to whether his legacy will be all positive or all negative. People had different, you know, opinions and views on that.
This is great. I mean, because in some sense, you're capturing an insight of a relationship with a president of the United States of America that is really distant from all of us. And actually, that's part of what we're trying to do with this show in a little different light. And that's connected to the memoir that you wrote earlier.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about that one.
Okay, the memoir, which came out in 2005, is a book about my own journey coming from the South, Arkansas, growing up with all the family members, parents being sharecroppers, undereducated, but who had a real sense of the need for education and the importance in it, and instill that in all their children, so much so that all of us, except for one, went on to college, and most of us, have graduate degrees and have what most people would consider successful lives.
Janis, I don't want to interrupt you, but can you explain the term sharecropper for people that don't understand what a sharecropper is exactly?
Sharecroppers are people who don't own their own land. They're poor, very poor, but they work the land of other landowners, people who do have land. And what they do is rent it or lease it to the sharecropper, and he works the land and pays for the use of the land through, cotton or soybeans or whatever the crop might be. And more times than not, sharecroppers were very poor and had family members that would help them in making sure that their crops were taken care of each year.
And really, their goal was almost just to break even, wasn't it? I mean, just to keep the family fed.
If you could break even, you were doing good.
Okay.
Really. I mean, and there's been a lot written about that relationship between sharecroppers and landowners, and many times, the stories go that sharecroppers had no idea at the end of the year, how much they actually owed, because the landowner was keeping count of everything. So the sharecropper was in a pretty bad position as far as being able to come out on top ever.
And that's an incredible story that we're talking about here. So you grew up in this family with sharecroppers, and you're dirt poor, and you have this journey that got most of the children in your family educated, and was a journey that took you into the White House under Bill Clinton's administration. So tell us more in terms of the education, and you were talking about your siblings and help us get the connection between what you're doing and your speech later on tonight.
Sure. I think what I do when I go out and talk about my book, Cotton Field of Dreams is actually the name of it, is talk about the importance of education. I go to schools and I talk a lot to young people, because even though we've come a long way as far as education is concerned, we still have a long way to go. There are still children who don't have that grasp of how important education is. I think over the years, we've lost a lot of the zeal for education and understanding that I don't care how much you have or how talented you are, that education is still very important. And so when I go out and talk, I tell people that the most powerful thing, out of everything that you could possibly get, is getting that foundation, that educational foundation. That's what my parents taught me. They were just dirt poor, like you said. So they knew that the only way that their children would have a different life from theirs was that we went on to college and got our education. But they also, along with that, taught us other values. And we understood the value of self-esteem, treating everybody fairly, the value of hard work, the value of giving back. We learned that early from my parents, that it's important no matter what you do and how much you get, that you find a way to give back. So those are all the kinds of values that were instilled in us. Now, we became, by our community and other people, this model family, because we had poverty. We were so impoverished. And then after we started going to college and all, we became like this family that people can point to and say, look at this family who had nothing. They came from nothing, and all of the children almost end up going to college and getting great degrees and all that. So there's a good part and a bad part to that. The good part is that you are proving that, what hard work and great values can mean. But on the other part is you kind of turn your head away from anything that says you're not a model for the rest of the world or the rest of your community. And I think that's why it's so important when I go out and talk that I talk about my sister and my relationship with my sister and what we learned over the years about my sister having a mental illness and how that affected my family, who people had decided had something really great going for us and were role models. And then we have to say, but my sister has mental illness. And that was something that my family had to deal with, and I write about that in the memoir.
So tell us about your sister. This sounds like a fabulous story.
Joanne. Joanne was 18 months younger than me. We were best friends. We were great friends. We grew up together. We played together. She was brilliant, so she ended up in the same class with me. She got a double promotion, they called it. And while we loved each other so deeply, we also were very competitive and sometimes very resentful of each other. But Joanne was different. She had always been different, and we didn't, we were in the South and in the rural area, and we didn't understand anything about mental illness. We just knew that she was just different. It wasn't until she went to college, we went to college together, that I started realizing that there really was something wrong. And so it was about at the age of 21, I think, that Joanne was actually diagnosed. I mean, things had gotten so bad that we had to force her to go to a doctor. Mm-hmm. And at around that time, she was diagnosed by the psychiatrist with paranoid schizophrenia.
So help us understand what you mean by different. So you have this sibling, you've got 19, mm-hmm. well, 18 other siblings, and mm-hmm. yet you understood that she was different and mm-hmm. didn't understand that she had this illness until she was 20. So mm-hmm. what did that look like growing up with Joanne? How did you understand she was different?
She was very outspoken always. I mean, we just thought that was different. Because we were all taught to be, in the South you were taught to be seen and not heard as young people, as children. And we were very religious. Joanne always questioned religion. She questioned just about any rules, which, we saw that as different, but we also saw that as she was very smart. But she went away one summer, the summer that we graduated from high school, and she was gone for, I think it was 6 weeks. And she came back, and the difference had really increased a great deal. She had lost lots of weight. She had started smoking. She had completely kind of disassociated herself from the family. And in fact, shortly after she returned, she would actually say that she really wasn't a part of our family, that, we were just, people that she lived with. It happened that she lived with us. So that began to make us a little afraid. We began to believe that there might be something really more wrong with just being different. Early on, we just thought she was a very vocal person, a person that didn't like rules, and she liked to stand out no matter what. But that increased over the years into something different even from that.
We're visiting with Janis Kearney, a Clinton biography, author of A Cotton Field of Dreams, and Janis is speaking this evening in Chicago at the Chicago Cultural Center, 78 East Washington. We're talking about her sister, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I'm wondering, Janis, once your sister Joanne was diagnosed with schizophrenia, what happened then? Was there a chance to get her the help, or is it, if we know now mm-hmm. what we knew back then, if we knew back then what we know now, would she have been treated differently at that time?
Well, she probably would have been treated differently, but also we would have known more than we knew, because I think a big part of the whole thing was that we were wrestling with, okay, how do we deal with this as a family? We had never discussed mental illness. We had never taken it seriously that it would actually happen to someone in our family. So it was a very hard thing for us to deal with.
Was the majority of your family in denial at that point?
I think no. I think at that point we weren't in denial. We just didn't know how, from day to day, to deal with it with Joanne and actually deal with her and to talk about it. And we didn't talk about it. We really didn't talk about it, except if there was something happened, and we had to talk about it. And there were things that happened. She lived with me for a while during her illness, and from time to time I would have to actually take her to the clinic because she would have an episode. And she was put on medication, and she would be fine for a while. But after, I think, and the doctor told me after a while, after they've been taking the medication and they feel fine, they really want to stop taking the medication. So that's what we had to deal with. She would be fine, and then she'd stop taking her medication. And, most people who don't understand mental illness, as we didn't, we'd say, well, why would she stop taking it? We thought it was just her being belligerent or her being stubborn or, this is Joanne being Joanne, not taking her medication. But, later, I guess, I learned that it's just a symptom of the illness. But I think why I wanted to write about it so badly was that not only did it affect Joanne's and my relationship, but it affected the whole family. And, and that's natural. But my parents, who were very religious, extremely religious, just, I think, and you find this a lot in the black community and minority communities probably all over the country, is that we want to say that mental illness is something that prayer can take care of. Or if you would go to church more, if you'd pray more, if you would turn it over to God more, then that would take care of it. So it was very, very hard for my parents to deal with it, even more so than her siblings.
And I think that's something that happens a lot when we really don't understand what's going on. We certainly look to our higher power or our spirituality to help us find the path that's going to work. So what would you want to have known then that you actually know now?
Well, I would have wanted to know, I guess, just know more so. I think I learned the basics, but I think I would have wanted to have someone talk to the whole family, which never happened. So in a sense, it never really opened up where we could talk to each other and help each other through that, because we were all suffering, but we didn't know how to deal with our suffering together as a family. We knew how to work hard. We knew how to talk about education, lots of lawyers in the family, talk about that kind of stuff. But when it came to mental illness as a family, we just did not deal with it well at all. And if we had known, we could have asked the psychologist or some counselor to come in and have a session or conversation with the entire family, especially the parents who never, ever talked to her doctor.
So you said the basics. What would you consider the basics to be at this stage?
Well, I know scientifically that it's nothing really that anyone did to cause it, that it's a chemical, basically a chemical imbalance, and that only medication can kind of control it to a certain extent, but that the medication has to be taken consistently and all that. And that Joanne didn't want to be sick, that she didn't do it to get attention. I think I understood all of that.
Yeah, so I'm actually hearing some things we've heard before. So, for example, we had another mother talking about her daughter having this psychotic break when she was at, I can't remember the name of the university. I think it was Purdue. And she was very athletic, and she came in, and then the behavior changed dramatically, similar to what you're talking about. You have an intelligent person, and then now she's smoking and doing these other things. And then also talking about things that are, which would be called delusional, things that do not have this basis in reality. And so the family becomes shocked with this because they don't know what to do.
Right.
You struggle to find out what to do, and what you're now learning has to be the basics, and which was one of those is that this is not caused by poor parenting. This is not caused by a person who is trying to be belligerent. This is an illness that affects the brain, and we need to get our heads around that, understanding that medication can work, and understanding to avoid blaming the person who has this illness, but kind of join them in terms of getting the support that they need in order to move forward.
Right.
So,
right. And I think that's what was missing for those years that Joanne suffered with mental illness, was that support from us, because we didn't know how to give it so much. I mean, nobody educated us enough to be as supportive as we could have been. I think I tried, and I think some other family members tried, but we just were not sensitive enough, and we weren't as educated enough to be as supportive as I think we all felt we should have been.
What would that support look like today if you have another opportunity meeting another family member or someone else? What would that look like today?
I think one of the most important things is for us to be supportive of each other and talk about it and make sure that we're not putting blame anywhere, because I think we may have already mentioned that Joanne took her life. I think a lot of what came after that was that sense of guilt from everyone. And I think the support and the understanding that it's nobody's fault, I think that would have allowed us to be even more supportive to her.
And Janis, I'm afraid we're just about out of time. Cotton Field of Dreams. How can people get this book? And also, what do you overall want people to get out of this book, Janis, when they read it?
What I would love for people to get out of the book is the two parts of my family story. The wonderful family that I grew up in, all the wonderful lessons that I learned growing up in the South, but also a story about my sister who had mental illness, and almost too late we found out how to deal with it. And I guess for especially minority families, to understand that there is nothing that we can do about it except to love that person, to support them, to make sure that they get the help that they need, and to be there for them when they need it. And I think for our community, we're just learning those basic things about mental illness.
I get goosebumps listening to this, as I do with some of the other people that journey with us, in part because we have people that have suffered from mental illness, they've taken their lives, and yet you relate to them in a way where you love them, you appreciate them, and you get their life out there so that their life can have meaning to other people and reduce the suffering. That is absolutely fabulous.
And again, Cotton Field of Dreams available at most bookstores, Janis?
Most
is that correct?
bookstores, or you can go to my website and order it from there. You can get a signed book from my website.
And what is that website, please?
It's Writing Our World Press, WRITINGOUR WorldPress.com.
And Conversations, William Jefferson Clinton from Hope to Harlem, is
Yes.
that available now, and how can they get that as well?
You can get that one from my website, or you can go to most bookstores, and if they don't have it, you can order it from the bookstores.
Well, and again, Janis speaking tonight. She'll be in downtown Chicago at the Chicago Cultural Center, 78 East Washington Street there. People can get tickets, I'm imagining, right up until the time of the event, as far as you know, Janis?
As far as I know, yes.
Well, that's wonderful. You are truly an inspirational story. We thank you for taking time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's just been an honor and a joy to walk with you. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And that's Spotlight on DeKalb County for today. Thank you for joining us for the Suicide Prevention Show here on 1360 WLBK, a station that truly cares about its community. And right now, here's some phone numbers that everybody should know. Let's start nationally with you, Tamara. Tell us about the number that people can call to get help if they're contemplating suicide, or if they think one of their loved ones may be contemplating suicide.
That's a national number. It's 1-800-SUICIDE.
Very good. And Chuck, let's go locally now. What do we have from you?
Locally, I have Kishwaukee Community Hospital. Their phone number is 756-1521.
And Mike?
Here in DeKalb, we also have the Ben Gordon Center. Their telephone number is 756-4875.
And we are truly blessed here in DeKalb County to also have the Family Service Agency at 758-8616. Have a good day and take care of yourselves.
The WLBK Suicide Prevention Show recently won the Silver Dome Award as the best public affairs radio program in Illinois.
Some of the extraordinary people we've talked to. First one that comes to mind is Denny Miller, a delightful guest, and really gave us an insight as to what it's like to be a coroner and have to deal with the prospect of somebody committing suicide.
We had the police chief on who spoke about how really difficult that is to investigate suicide and telling the families about what that's like. It's really far-reaching. Friends and family, neighbors are all so much more deeply affected than most of us realize if we haven't been touched by it ourselves.
I was under the old myth that if you talk to somebody about suicide, if you actually use the word suicide, that would prompt that person to commit suicide. And Chuck, we've learned that's not true.
It's very not true. The more you talk about it, the less stigma there is, the more comfortable the person that's having those thoughts. They feel a little more free to talk about it, open up, and hopefully not complete that act.
Join us Sunday morning at 9:30 for the Suicide Prevention Show on the station that cares about its community, 1360 WLBK.